Welcome in, everyone. Thanks for joining me today on the Buddhist Wisdom podcast. Today, I have my good friend, Cayce Howe, with us. Welcome, Cayce.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So I just thought to introduce Cayce a little bit for those of you who don't know him. We've known each other quite a long time now, maybe 15 years, something like that, 20 years.
Something like that. Yeah, probably 2006 or 7, something like that. Yeah.
We met back at Land of Medicine Buddha, which is one of the main centers of one of my main teachers, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And I met Cayce. Well, you were kind of like you were doing tech support and all kinds of stuff for the center. Yeah.
I had the coolest job ever. I worked in their media lab at Land of Medicine Buddha, and you did the filming of the teachings. Yeah, and they got to edit those. That's spent right. All day and around the Dharma. That's so cool.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that is a really cool job there. And just like I said, to introduce Cayce a little bit, and then Cayce moved on from that to actually become a Dharma teacher, meditation teacher himself. Cayce founded the Long Beach arm of Inside LA, just outside of it's in Los Angeles, but in Long Beach. And right now, Cayce, you're mainly working with sustainable caring and gentle grieving, which are organizations you co-founded to work with people in mental health, meditation, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Just kind of more secular based, wellness programs.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I think we could kick it off with that. I mean, Cayce and I, we often are just sending messages back and forth in WhatsApp about, some latest tech going on or, Dharma stuff. So we're always bantering. So I think we'll be able to get into a fun conversation today. And, we were chatting a little bit about, our backgrounds are mostly in traditional Buddhism, Dharma. Those are our kind of like core passions as practitioners, like in our own practice. And then also we share that with others in our teaching work. So I think it's, I'd love to hear more kind of what's going on, what's up for you in that. But also we were talking about the intersection between that and secular meditation work, because, tell me if I'm wrong, you've actually done quite a bit in both, and you kind of move quite fluidly between them, not necessarily like they're in the same talk, but meaning like you have different roles you play in both those worlds.
Yeah. My time is divided between I kind of like a day job and a nighttime job, so to speak, so like my day job is secular. I work in mental health facilities. I work at clinics. So a lot of work in like more the medical kind of clinical world. My business partner for sustainable caring, Dr. Monisha Vasa, she is a psychiatrist and addiction specialist. So her and I do work in different types of facilities and whatnot. And then, then I also teach Dharma. I teach Dharma still in traditional settings, whether it be leading retreats, like silent retreats or one-on-one clients. I still love that because you could really go deep, as with your practice groups and all that stuff. It's like these small groups or one-on-ones they're brilliant. So still, doing more traditional stuff and then bringing in, I really love all the different ways now that the traditional teachings have been woven into different secular programs, and just it's just have been kind of more invited in to secular places, so you can speak to the Dharma in different ways. I always go back to like Buddhism, for example. The Dalai Lama saying it's 90% psychology. It's like Buddha doesn't own awareness or compassion or loving kindness. So we say Dharma, but it's like the Dharma is, just what's within our own selves. And so it in and of itself can weave very fluidly, through humans in different relationships and different environments and situations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well put. I often think of like, I kind of separate. I kind of make categories, not because, I mean, categories only matter because, from my perspective, they're superficial containers, so we have some clarity of what we want to work with. Not that they're ultimate truths about something, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes I like to categorize, like there's general dharma, which is all kinds of different, Indic wisdom traditions, other kinds of wisdom traditions. Even in Buddhism, we define dharma as wider than Buddhism, right? Just anything that's
Exactly.
virtue. I mean, the basic definition would be anything that's virtuous, that's going to move us into pro-social conduct, compassion and action, loving action towards ourselves and others, and mitigate harm and mitigate the causes of suffering. That would be considered dharma. And so yeah, that goes well beyond Buddhism. And then I make this category of Buddha Dharma, right? Like to kind of get clarity. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's one way I talk about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that one like little maybe limiting factor as far as like in a secular teaching, and sometimes I could, I push the envelope here too, but which is like liberation. Like, so in other words, liberation as opposed to like stress relief or soothing anxiousness, for example. So kind of like our intention can differ with if we're in a certain, like if I'm in a clinic, I've suffered from lots of anxiety myself, and so I know that there's certain techniques that work really well for anxiety, for example. Worked in anxiety and depression clinics for a long time, so we could take some of these teachings and have the intention to kind of like cool and soothe certain things. These same things are really can be used for liberation. So not just that episode of anxiety or that ailment of anxiety, but it can move, far beyond that. And I think the Buddha Dharma, we have that intention for like this more grandiose liberation. Is more inclusive. Like lots of sufferings can be cooled and soothed. And so we kind of take that limiting, but it's beautiful because it's kind of a dharma door. They're like, wow, if it helps with my anxiety, what else can it help with? And then it can really bloom from there,
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, it's a distinction I often make too between like cultivating our healthy humanness, like, working with distortions that that don't serve us, and trying to remove or remedy distortions in mental health or physical health or energetic health. And I make a distinction between that and then liberative teachings, which go beyond healthy human beingness. Actually, they go beyond humanness. So, which is a whole tricky thing if we want to open a can of worms there. But anyways, is that kind of more or less? I mean, I frame it like that. I'm hearing you frame it in a similar way. Yeah, is that true?
Yeah. I love that word. Would you say liberative or something?
Yeah, liberative.
Yeah, because it's, and I know this word is kind of a funny word in a way, spiritual. Like like spiritual practices, but it's of the spirit. So some things it's like of the human, like of the Homo sapien. Like the Homo sapiens wired in a certain way. And it's reacting to its environment in a certain way. And that there's certain things that can help physiologically, like with this Homo sapien thing, and then there's things that are of the spiritual. There's spiritual practices and getting in touch with the spiritual aspects of our own beingness, right?
Yeah.
And kind of more opening to that curiosity, that investigation, and working with those spiritual aspects of ourselves. And I think, there's a clear distinction when we're doing secular work. We're not kind of, again, with that intention and that curiosity moving into the spiritual. We're kind of keeping it more, as far as expectations and kind of what we're getting, it's more worldly. And then when it comes into our inner environment, it's more physiological, as opposed to spiritual attainment or spiritual insights, or spiritual types of like little awakenings or whatnot.
Yeah. And that word that word worldly, yeah, that word's, a tricky word for me, but I'm just kind of recognizing it as, you started the conversation talking about intention and motivation,
Mm-hmm.
often our intention is worldly in the sense of we're just trying to solve a problem now. We're trying to have some shift, right? That's kind of how I think of worldly. I'm not sure if that resonates with you, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, because it's, ultimately meditation and Dharma is not really there to make our life, quote unquote, better.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And yet, because our relationship with life can get better, we could feel better even in the chaos of life.
Yeah.
But how we present it, obviously, like we're compassionate beings and we have self-compassion. Like we want things to feel a bit different. So, and it could be short term. It could be a short term, fix of a problem, that kind of mentality. And I think that's okay. If we can have techniques and whatnot that can assist, alleviate these acute kind of thing. And then we could present like, well, again, if it worked like this, then, what if we walked through the world more peacefully? And no matter what we came upon, what if we were at ease with that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's incredible. I really like the story of the Buddha and how he met old age, sickness, and death.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from that world, being a prince and being, sheltered from old age, sickness, and death, the three heavenly messengers. And I love his like motivation of like, he wanted to meet old age, sickness, and death with grace. Like he didn't say, I want to be enlightened or I want to be omniscient or I want to be clairvoyant or I want to be able to levitate or I don't know. He's just like, holy crap. Like if this is real, I want to be able to meet this with peace.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of times when we come to the Dharma or these inner resource tools or whatnot, we're just like, oh my gosh, I'm suffering. And I really would like a release from that. Can it be liberating beyond that in that situation? For sure. But wouldn't it be nice, just to soothe this for right now?
Yeah. And I think we, for me, I've recognized over the years, teaching about 15 years, meditation and Dharma, Buddha Dharma, is that like, that has to be acknowledged somewhat, the sense that, like, initially, if that's not acknowledged for people, I think the idea of liberation in the spiritual domain, liberation from suffering is what we're talking about. You mentioned, the Buddha seeking liberation from birth, old age, sickness, and death. Just in that statement is sort of like, I think that can be quite confounding for people if they're new to meditation or new to, wanting some transformation or healing work. What can be confounding is in the statement is freedom from birth, right? In that, in that question or statement or exploration. I mean, that's huge what that even means, because most people don't think birth is a problem. And in Buddhism, we do. And what does that mean that we think it's a problem? You see, so right in that statement, that's what's interesting about Buddhism. I think it puts forth these things that open up much bigger questions that are not easily answerable. And they're more like, I treat them more as questions, more as fields of exploration to open through practice. But initially, I don't know what you find, because you work, you work with all flavors of people seeking healing and, people seeking meditation and stuff. Initially, I think that's quite confounding for people. And they, that's why I like your approach in the sense like first we need to give people food. If they come into our house, we're like, hey, check out this like really abstract painting that you're not going to understand, but I understand it and I love it. Instead just they want water, they want food,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that, those questions, it's kind of those questions that we should be all asking, obviously. And even though they're confusing and we should be asking those questions because they could relieve suffering. And at the same time, we don't want to ask those questions too soon because it's just like, hey, like you mentioned, like, let's give them something to eat, But I think like Um, Kind of maybe I'm going to talk this out. Maybe it could start as something mundane and go deeper. But
Sure.
I wrote my poetry book. I called it Becoming Water.
Yeah.
And there's an opening poem, and I can't even recite the poem actually, but it's speaking to like, if you're combustible, like if somebody throws a lit match at you and you're combustible, like you
Mm.
have those elements within, like you can explode, right?
Yeah.
Or you could light on fire or whatever. But if someone throws a lit match at you and you're water, that
Mm.
is diffused, right? And so, I think that I use that analogy at kind of for a lot of different things, like how we're meeting what's here. And I feel like that can extend pretty far. I can meet people pretty close, like I should say pretty new. If somebody's
Mm.
new and is meeting something that's very harsh, um, we could say, hey, let's look within to see if we could find something. We could take refuge somewhere within
Yeah.
ourselves. Like, let's just check it out. And then how far can we take that? Gartner Rinpoche has this wonderful analogy of our awareness being like a flame. And he's
Mm.
like, if those small branches come along, our flame of awareness can burn up those little branches. And we're like,
Yeah.
look at me. Like, isn't that awesome? That little thought that doesn't have a lot of strength to it or not a charge to it, just resting in wakefulness, and it'll come and go. We can practice non-grasping mind, and we're like winning in a way,
Yeah.
But then he's like, there's going to come a time when there's a log, and that log is going to snuff out your flame of awareness, because we're practicing. And the more we practice, that flame grows stronger and stronger. And the more that we could burn up. And I think that's the inner freedom that comes saying, wow, like I have something within myself that is a place of refuge, that I can meet these things, and I could allow them just to be, or burn them up, or whatever analogy we want to use. And then the more that I do that, the more comfortable I can kind of walk the earth, because I know I'm not going to be swayed by everything, by this and that and everything else.
Wow, I love that analogy. I never heard that analogy from Gartner Rinpoche.
It's so great. Good. I'll share a teaching with you, this retreat that he did that's on tape. It's so cool. There's so much good wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah, he's an amazing teacher.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, and I think you and I share that basic ground where, for me, if someone were to kind of like pin me down and say, well, what's the Dharma practice we can't leave home without? Like, what's the essential practice? I would say the practice of awareness,
Yeah.
When we look at the methods of Dharma, they all come down to awareness. Cause, if we just have the path as the three pillars of Dharma, Shila, ethics, or how we hold compassionate conduct, samadhi or meditative awareness, and then prajna or wisdom, they all involve awareness. And I think there's even what makes Shila unique, and I think Buddhist ethics unique, because they're Buddhist ethics are a way to train in mindful awareness around our conduct, right? So I think, it's all awareness for me at the end of the day. When it comes to the practice, it's all about training that flame, so to speak. Yeah.
100%. And I can't remember where I heard it. But just, somebody took the 84,000 teaching. Maybe it was Joseph Goldstein. Maybe I was listening to one of his, great Dharma talks. But, essentially Buddha taught non-grasping mind, and you could say, hey, the fastest way to non-grasping mind is through bodhicitta, growing in that selflessness, taking away that's something that we're just, grasping onto so forcefully. Or you could train in, insight and prajna and all that, and the wisdom aspects of the teaching. But I love that, because I agree with you 100% of, awareness. And then something comes along, and then, non-grasping mind, and we're awake again. I love that, as far as like where the rubber meets the road. How can we practice awareness non-grasping mind,
Yeah.
and we're back,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah. I
do.
like how you go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead. But I want, you said something that I want to go back around
Sure.
to.
Yeah. Keep it, put a bookmark there.
Yeah, I will.
um, no, I love how you connected awareness and non-grasping. I often say non-clinging, but it's the
Mm,
same for me. They're
yeah, I
just
like that.
synonymous. But I like how you connected with awareness, because I often get questions from people, because when you do look at the heart of the Dharma, it's about cultivating a process of non-grasping, non-clinging, or some people say non-attachment. But I think people often get really confused with that, because I think for a lot of us, there's this sense of like, most of us are relying 100% on our conceptual experience to frame the world, to frame who we are, who others are, what the Dharma is, what awareness is. And, just to put it out there for some of the listeners who are new to these kinds of terms and ideas, awareness is not necessarily a conceptual state. There is conceptual awareness, but it's not thinking. It's definitely not thinking concept. And so already we're talking about states of mind that are not thoughts. They're not thinking. And so, that means we're aiming at some sort of shift in the mind, moving towards non-grasping, that has nothing to do with a conscious, like, conceptual decision of like, now I'm going to, push this thing away and take this thing. Because I think a lot of people think non-attachment just means becoming cold or like willing oneself into it. And I don't experience the process of it like that at all. I don't know about you. It's like I've tried to will myself into non-grasping. It just doesn't work. It's really painful, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people, like that coldness you're talking about, like some people kind of take non-attachment and think it's detachment.
Exactly.
And I'm like, no, not detached. It's like, that's kind of like an aversion or like a switcheroo, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But it's really that surrender. Like you mentioned, that force comes with that more concept, more linear, more A to Z. And, like I say, like you can't get a PhD in enlightenment. Like, if we can get a PhD in enlightenment, we'd all just be conceptualizing our way there. And it's only through surrendering or through subtraction. And when we wake up to awareness, if we look at the causes and conditions that delivered us into that, it was through a moment of surrender or non-grasping or non-clinging. And that has to, and I think that's what I really do love about the heart practices, is that they move us into like kind of this gentle release, and where we can kind of feel full and complete, and then kind of have the fearlessness, if you will, to allow that natural surrender into the wisdom and experience this like non-conceptual wakefulness. Because at least in my practice, sometimes it's scary, to go into don't know, like, this non-conceptual thing. And it's really going into that kind of over the edge. Like, going to don't know. I like to remind myself, like, only by don't know can I actually know. Because again, we're talking about a bit of transcendence, that which is looking at the mind. We say, well, my thoughts. Who owns the thoughts? My emotions. Who owns the emotions? My body sensations. Who owns that? Because those fall away. I'm still here, so I really want to marinate and stay awake in thatness. But it's sometimes scary. So if I can fill myself up, with loving kindness, compassion, I could feel the fullness. I could feel the fullness. I could move into emptiness because I feel full. It's almost like I kind of like to call like the heart practices somewhat of a currency on the spiritual journey to go to the next level. At least for me, it's fear based, and for me to really, not to be moving from like enlightened Cayce. Of course, Mago has no problem with enlightened Cayce, but like the annihilation of Cayce, it has a problem with, So it's like, but if I could really use those heart practices, then I could feel safe, moving through this journey. And I think that's one thing that hasn't been taken, along for the ride as far as the secular stuff goes.
Mm.
I just kind of want to just point to this. This is one thing that I've seen, and that in, let's say, the Tibetan traditions and some of the, the other, more traditional Buddhist traditions, there is so much implicit devotion because they have really strong lineages. They have gurus, they have, teacher-student relationships. And there's so much of course, there's techniques, Tonglen, 7-point cause and effect, metta practices, all of these traditional practices. But then there's this other devotional aspect that's very, very strong, like just really incredible. And I think about this sometimes, where some of these techniques, where people get confused with meditation being a technique. Meditations is what the technique delivers you into,
Mm-hmm.
but so there's meditation, which has been plucked out of a system, and then there's obviously issues with that, like long-term issues with, like, how do I sustain a practice and all this other stuff that is missing. And then there's things like this, where because there's not this overwhelming kind of heart from maybe a time of a little kid that somebody's introduced into this kind of this web of interconnectedness with their lineage and their gurus and their parents' gurus and teachers and all this stuff. So it's like, when you get some of these different teachings, and it's okay that we don't have all of that. I think it is important that we're aware of that, to replace it with more explicit heart practices, to really train in the heart practice a lot. So we understand, like, these are really important things to have a holistic approach to this. I mean, Buddhism, for example, it's not the only one, but Buddhism has been turning out enlightened beings like an assembly line for 2,600 years. You look at these lineages, and it's just like every single generation enlightened being, boom, boom, boom.
Many, usually
many from each generation. And I love having lineages, because you could read texts from these teachers in the 7th century or 11th or 13th century, and they're awake, they're awakened. And so if you look at those systems, you're like, wow, this system has been working for a long period of time. And if we change it, we have to be aware of the system and start replacing these elements. And another element, not to keep going on for a while here, but because you brought it up, another element is ethics and morality. Like, it's emphasized so much in the traditional practices, and in secular practices, it could be missed entirely. You can go through an entire course in meditation, and it could never be brought up, not a single time. And obviously, if you're just speaking of meditation, like we just talked about meditation, if we live a life or a day of service and kindness and all of that, we go to meditate, of course. The mind is at ease. If you have an argument, or you're kind of living outside of wholesome intention, you go to meditate. Very difficult. Very difficult to practice. So that's just like a really small example. But that's why I think those two things are just interesting to note. Like, the emphasis on the heart through devotion, which is not really present, and then also that overall ethics and morality.
I mean, there's so much there. I mean, first, I'll just say a few things based on what you shared. Which, I mean, generally, I feel there's a holism that exists within indigenous Buddhism that hasn't been replicated yet in a Western form. That's why, I'm kind of, I'm a little bit an outlier on this. I think we're a ways away from a Western Buddhism. In a lot of these Asian countries, it took hundreds of years for a Buddhism to form culturally, like a Japanese Buddhism or different kinds of Chinese forms of Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism. In Tibet, it took hundreds of years. It wasn't just like, oh, now we got it, because we think we got it. Because there's a holism, there's a container that has to develop that includes all the aspects of our humanity and speaks to that humanity, and at the same time offers freedom from the bondage of humanity. You see, and you can see how complex that is. How do you offer something to validate humanity, use the best aspects of our humanity, and then form a liberative practice to move beyond the bondage of it? You know, that's one way I think of it. And so I love how you're naming, because devotion itself, a lot of us sometimes think of devotion in a more theistic way. And in Buddhism, it's not a theistic devotion. It's a devotion that's a way of being, which includes loving kindness. So in Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, people often ask, oh, why isn't there like explicit metta practices or loving kindness practice? Like, why aren't those emphasized as much as in other Buddhist traditions? And the truth is they are. Like, we practice the four immeasurables, and when we're developing relative bodhicitta, some of the points in that are developing explicit loving kindness. But there's also another answer, which is loving kindness is embedded in the intention we're cultivating for meditating in the first place. It's embedded in the care of why we're doing something, which I would say is kind of meeting our basic humanity, our requirement for warmth and connection as a human being, right? Yeah. But then there's this sense of devotion, which Tibetan Buddhism spends a little bit more energy on that area of putting love and cultivating love via devotion, which is a whole way of being with the world around us, based on the recognition that all beings have awakened nature. All beings are capable and have the possibility to be completely free because that's their nature. So already there's an embedded wholesomeness. There's already something that's quite different to original sin. Basically, it's the opposite. It's original purity or original wakefulness or original wholeness. I don't know how we could say it. So I love how you're pointing out, when we're kind of processing these things in the West, we also have to recognize kind of what are the cultural pieces we're missing that we need to fill in. Because I completely agree with you. I think there's this sense of like basic warmth a lot of us did not get a healthy human being connection to from a young age. Yeah. Instead, we were fed competition, other kinds of forms of antisocial behavior, antisocial thinking, antisocial. I use antisocial lightly, right? Not in a heavy way. Just a sense of like, if I'm being taught competition, how does that make me kind of interpret my friend or another person around me or another community member? They're automatically put in an adversarial position as opposed to a friendly, so there's just basic stuff sometimes we're missing. Yeah. At least I can speak for the United States, growing up in the US. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But yeah, I love how you pointed out, like we can fill that in with the heart practices, loving kindness, compassion, devotion. And I would say there's like a fundamental one too, which I often, I share with people in mentoring via the handshaking practice from Soknin Rinpoche, which is actually like healing some of our disconnect to our own ability to care for ourselves. Not in the sense of like, often like we already care for ourselves. Like everyone cares for themselves. There's no lack of that. The problem is, how are we caring for ourselves? I think that's where the fundamental disconnect happens for people. Anyways, I said a lot of stuff, but I'd love to hear.
No, it's all great. Yeah. All great stuff. Yeah. Well, I like how you brought up like this kind of fundamental type of like competition, like how we brought up and whatnot. And then I think of like the Bodhisattva vow, and that's another innate thing where, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And like, my sole purpose is to liberate myself so I can help liberate others. And, if we're moving through the world like that, and also, recognizing people's Buddha nature, all of that, it's a different way to move through the world. And I think that in the West, we need to be okay. I think one thing that's not happening is that we're holding on too tightly to those other traditions, if you're a Tibetan Buddhist or whatever, it's like, we need to be okay with creating our own. Like, it's okay. Like Thich Nhat Hanh always says, like, what's your Buddhism? Like, if you go around to different countries, they have created their own version of it. And that is not like we're throwing out like traditional stuff or whatnot, but we're integrating into what we need, and to have that openness to say, hey, man, we're an AI we're an AI world now. We're like
Yeah.
AI, United States or wherever you are, and you have all of these different things that are happening that were completely removed from when the Buddha was around, or Tibetan Buddhism when it was created. Like, hey guys, we have to meet this with what do we need, and give ourselves the permission, to do that. And
Hmm. Hmm.
like you and I was in I practiced a lot of eclecticism, growing up. I grew up around Berkeley. I would read everything they had on the shelves at all the Berkeley bookstores. I spent about 13 years in the Paramahansa Yogananda
That's right. I
Self-Realization
forgot
Fellowship
about that. Yeah.
lineage.
That
Yeah.
was my kind of introduction to Eastern spirituality as well,
Oh, yeah.
Autobiography of a
Yeah.
Yogi. Yeah.
Advaita Yogi, classic. Yeah, I lived at one of their centers for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then if you live like, yeah, I was born and raised in California. I mean, we have so many different traditions here, and beautiful, amazing teachers from these traditions, like crazy. So we need to come in and find that common thread of what works for us and how does it work. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of it. Like we're saying, like, hey, these traditions had this, we don't have this, we don't have that kind of lineage, and we don't have devotion, for example. But look at what we do have. We can cultivate it in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is I mean, we could get together for a whole nother episode on this,
Yeah.
I think, because I'll just say something briefly just to share some thoughts on it. And it's okay if you disagree with it, like that's fine too.
Yeah.
We can disagree and maybe it's an interesting conversation because we can have different perspectives. I think this is a very careful, how do you say, not careful. It's a very tricky thing because often we don't even, I find, or at least me, I should speak for myself. I wasn't given even the cultural context to understand how to take a wisdom tradition and integrate it into, another cultural context. And what I mean by that is I see it much differently now after about 23 years in the Tibetan Buddhist lineages. I see this more as a process. Like if we're, because I agree with you, we need to experiment. We need to see how to integrate these things into our culture, how to teach them in ways that are applicable to people, how to embody them ourselves, in ways that are applicable to us. And I'm kind of the notion that happens naturally when we genuinely engage with a lineage and don't augment it, initially. Which, like I said, I'm a bit of an outlier on this. And what I mean by that is, like, if we're immediately augmenting something before having transformed ourselves within it, we're immediately changing something we don't understand on a deeper level. And so it's this tricky thing where, like, I think it's a little bit of a catch-22 because we're in this, you and I both acknowledge, I think, that we need to make this, Buddhism has to become, Western at some point, and or United States, person, French, all the different kinds of Western countries. It needs to embody the culture from the, that the people relate to. But at the same time, if we're too quick to that and we throw the baby out with the bathwater, we don't get the deeper transformation, and so that's kind of my critique, of this, where I just want to name that I think that's not an easy thing to navigate. I'm trying to navigate it just by doing my own practice and sharing from my experience, but also connecting people to a lineage. So it's not just like, because you see this all over the place. The spiritual industrial complex is large and, a huge money-making machine.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing because people need to make a living, but it also can skew things because then there's this tendency in the West to be like, well, I'm now going to make the, insert name version of the Dharma and like TM it, and like sell it. And it's kind of missing the point. I feel like, well, why not just share with people? I think the work you and I generally do, and I'm not criticizing anyone else, just raising a critique, which is, we try to understand and embody the Dharma. we still both consider ourselves as beginners, even though we've been doing this for many, many years. And then we share our wisdom with people and help them in their practice, and then point them to other teachers when they need that.
Yeah,
In the
absolutely.
lineages.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm just kind of sharing that. I think we share a similar view, but I just wanted to also say, you're welcome to disagree if you need to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that for one, it could be definitely multi-generational, like that, that shift and the change. But one thing I would like to see more of is, a more of a reliance on the elders. There are, and, I'm almost 50. I don't consider myself an elder in this at all. Like I've been doing it maybe 30 years or something, but there's elders that have been doing it, 50 years and whatnot, that are up in the West, and they spent many, many years, with authentic teachers, the 30 something years with authentic teachers, and still sit with authentic, teachers to this day, that, lineage holders and whatnot. And I think that we need to rely on those elders a little bit more, because I think those elders are really hip on giving the reins to the younger generation, like, and to really say, hey guys, things have changed so much. Like, you guys know so much, and it's maybe a generation of releasing the reins more than ever. Like the elders have released the reins, even to the top of organizations. Have done so. And I think there's a beautiful aspect to that. There's a wisdom, like you're mentioning, that can only be found in practice. There's the worldly stuff that's happening, but then there's like, if you sat with yourself for decades, then there's that type of wisdom too. And hey, I know the political environment and this and that environment is shifting and changing. And then can we meet that with like sitting for 50 years? Can we meet it like that?
Yeah. I think it's really valuable what you're saying. It's true. And again, I don't mean to bring the pessimistic side. It's another one of the predicaments, because we have a culture that does not respect elders. We don't have a way of understanding that, yes, like maybe elders can't produce as much material things in a community, but they have, like you're saying, all this wisdom. I often say, like, I really, want to see that back in our Western culture, at least in the United States, of respecting the wisdom of elders, because, whether they've done tons and tons of meditation or not, they have often a lot of wisdom just because they've gone through more crap. It's sort of like, just if you've gone through more suffering, you have some kind of wisdom to offer. And so I agree with you, but I see it as kind of an uphill battle, because we don't have a culture of respecting elders. I mean, what do we do with elders in our society? We kind of throw them away, more or less, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm pointing to. It's just kind of honoring the sitting practice, because it takes a long time, like you're mentioning, like throwing out some of the stuff before you absorb it. Sometimes if somebody goes on a retreat and then wants to teach it or something, and I understand the maybe wanting to help, because you're like, oh, that really helped me, I want to help other people with it. But like anything else, you want to sit with it. And so there's some wisdom that just comes from that sitting part and really integrating it.
Yeah. Wonderful.
My business partner, Dr. Vasa, and I talk about this sometimes, where, there's content creators and they're creating content and getting followers that way and getting like respect, and, people see them as authorities. And yet there's some people in the trenches doing the work. If you're a psychiatrist, and again, no knock on people doing both. Sometimes you're just in the trenches. If you're meditating hours a day, and then you're going to work with one-on-one clients, and then you're going to do this and this, content creating creates, it takes a long time. You can't do both sometimes, so, so I think we are missing gems. There's teachers. Yeah. There's teachers like the teachers that I feel like the most amazing teachers don't have any social media presence at all. Like nobody knows them. Um, so yeah, I think that having some respect for people who are offline completely, who are dedicating themselves completely to their craft. And maybe it's not a hierarchy thing, but it's definitely a respect thing, saying, hey, um, just because you have 60,000 followers doesn't mean everything. Sometimes this person was a monk or a nun for 25 years and they're in retreat, and we need to respect that type of something too.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully put. And just to segue to respect your time too, I think that's a nice segue into talking a little bit about your work with sustainable caring and gentle grieving, moving a little bit into kind of a secular approach to healing work too. And what do I want to say? Because something I noticed in the work you do through sustainable caring and gentle grieving is you invite in staff, colleagues, collaborators, who maybe aren't, the most famous in their field, but you invite in people that you feel have wisdom and depth to offer. So, I'd love to hear more on kind of the work you're doing, as well as that component of kind of, I see you actually walking the walk with what you just said, because you do invite in people into your organizations that you feel have depth to offer. I think.
Yeah. And 100% is kind of like one of our pillars of, and one reason that we were doing what we're doing. So, I co-founded Sustainable Caring, and we offer a plethora of wellness programs in the secular space. And one reason why we wanted to do it was we were in the wellness space. I worked in mental health for a long time and whatnot, and taught meditation in clinical settings for a long time, and so Dr. Vasa and I both saw that there was a need for mindfulness, meditation, compassion, creativity, meeting burnout with that, meeting a lot of these different ailments with those types of practices. And then also too, we saw like our amazing friends who were being solopreneurs in that arena, in the wellness arena, and not being able to keep up with marketing themselves and doing this. And then also maybe not wanting to market themselves. Like they want to do their thing, and they're dedicated to their practices and whatnot. So we're like, well, why don't we all come together and create something that we could help with the marketing and the branding and the websites and, those types of things that need to be done when you create a company and go out and, get the clients and stuff like this, and then hire people who we just know and love because they happen to be totally badass at what they do. And I hate to say it, but sometimes in wellness, it is a little bit of the wild, wild west. You could be a yoga teacher in a weekend, or you can be doing it for 20 years. You could be a meditation. You can get certified in meditation. I'm not certified in meditation at all. I've been doing it for 30 years, and I've taken teacher trainings, and I took a teacher training because I know and I love them. I love the lineage that I took the teacher training in. And they didn't give me a certificate because that's not what it's about. It's about the teaching, and so it is a bit of a wild, wild west, and I'm protective of Dharma. I want meditation to be taught well. Scott, you joined me on a really amazing meditation teacher training that you and I did together, and I brought in like 5 or 6, I can't remember, the best meditation teachers I could find. And I gave away pretty much all of my part of the money. I didn't care. It's all about I think, you really embody this too, which is just like a real commitment to the integrity of these practices that we've been doing for a long time and really have helped us out. And that's what it's about. So Dr. Vasa and I just really want to merge those two worlds of hey, it's great to be teaching in hospitals. It's wonderful to be teaching a team of surgeons, like meditation. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, and we could also employ people that we love and care about and that are really, really good at what they do.
Yeah, wonderful. I've always appreciated you very much for your integrity in the work you do. You know, we've been collaborators, like you said, on a few different projects. And yeah, so that's awesome. Like that integrity you have in the work you do with sustainable caring and gentle grieving. So, you know, just for the listeners, like I'd love if you can share a little bit more. I mean, you shared a little bit about sustainable caring. If you could share more about gentle grieving, sort of the core of the work of both, a little bit more about maybe, you know, who are you looking for to be a part of it? Like who's it for? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so gentle grieving is one of our newer offerings, but actually we've been working on for probably the longest. And this stems just from a motivation of Dr. Vasa being a psychiatrist for a number of years and not having a resource that she could just refer to, because when it comes to grief and loss, it's very acute. It's kind of more than like a clinician can handle a lot of times if somebody's going through something. So we created a membership type of offering. So it's just ongoing. So people can refer to us, and we have an online portal with meditations, journaling prompts, you know, creativity, things to do and whatnot. And then we meet virtually twice a month as well. So we have that kind of, you know, that human contact as well. And so, yeah, like with the grief and loss, so all of our programs merged, like meditation, self-compassion, creativity. Those are kind of like the pillars. And so it's very similar with our grief and loss course. It's not so much processy, you know, as far as we do have clinicians online and whatnot, but it's more supporting each other through shared stories and whatnot, as far as that kind of community aspect. And then internally, yeah, we're teaching meditation. You know, how are we meeting grief and loss and suffering? And as far as kind of who's it for? All types of loss and grief. Obviously, when we speak to grief and loss, a lot of it, you know, we think of like losing a loved one, but we suffer loss all the time. We suffer loss of, like, it could be a job, or it could be of an ability, you know, like right now, like last couple of weeks, I'm 48 years old, and I've been looking at the computer for the last couple of weeks and getting dizzy, and I'm like, what's going on, you know? And so, yeah, on Monday I went, and you know, for the first time in my life, I'm getting glasses, and I've been suffering the loss of like being able to look at my phone or look at my computer screen. Like it's getting weird, you know? And it's small. It's a small loss, but it's a little disorienting, you know? But yeah, so there's a lot of different types of loss. We had a great interview with Mika Shah, who is one of our teachers at Sustainable Caring, and she's a former Olympic caliber athlete. And she had a great interview with, you know, suffering loss as an athlete. And of course, you lose abilities, which you really self-identify with, like this ability to do what you used to do. And she brought up a good point of just suffering a loss, like in a race. You know, she's like, hey, every time you line up, you know, you could lose, you know. But it's very powerful. You know, this is definitely, you know, this course is meeting really intense suffering, right? But it's something that's beautiful that we could help each other, you know, through stuff like this. Yeah,
wonderful. I mean, grief it's so many things, right? So it's a very challenging process to go through. And I like how you're naming it as more than just sickness and death. You know, I mean, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking, I mean, I have losses every single day. You know, most of them are small, but you know, small and large are relative. Like for some people,
Mm-hmm.
What to us is a relatively small loss can be huge for them. It's
Yeah.
very relative. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And, I was sitting in actually my eye appointment before they did my eye stuff, and
Yeah.
I didn't know what was going on because it is a really weird feeling, and there were some people in the waiting room, and some are older, and they were alone, just sitting by themselves. And I thought, man, like, I don't think anyone should go into an appointment, like a doctor appointment alone,
Mm.
because what if they heard bad news? They're just sitting there by themselves. What if somebody gets bad news and they're by themselves, and, how are they going to get home? That type of thing. I was just thinking about that. And it's like, being there with each other for these times in whatever way that we can, because like you said, it's relative. Like somebody could just go in there and get, you know, some news at any time. So yeah, being there for each other and caring for one another in any way that we can, is, I think, so helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So I'll put the links in the YouTube video here. If you're on listening on Spotify or iTunes, they can check you out at it's gentlegrieving.org, I believe, or
Yeah.
.com.
So yes, gentlegrieving.com.
Okay.
And sustainablecaring.com has gentle grieving in there too.
Okay.
So like if you go to sustainablecaring.com, you can click on the gentle grieving. Yeah. And so you could find it all there too. But yeah, gentlegrieving.com, we have a cool blog. And all of our interviews that we're doing are on there too. And, we created a new YouTube channel as well. So we have to interview Scott for gentle grieving.
I'm in. Yeah. I've been doing, I my picture's there on the website. So I think
that's right. He's part of the team.
Part of the team.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And, for those of you who just want to check out Cayce's work as a Dharma and meditation teacher, you can go to caycehowe.com. I'll also put that in the link in YouTube. Howe is the last name.
Yeah. And his first name is spelled weird. Cayce.
How's Cayce normally spelled?
Well, there's a lot, but Casey.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Common.
Yeah.
But I was named after Edgar Cayce, for the old peeps out there that remember that guy. He was an old clairvoyant. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
The neat dude, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. So just anything on your mind, or anything you wanted to chat about before we wrap up, Cayce, anything we talked about? We went pretty heavy into kind of hardcore Dharma for a minute, but anything just in kind of your secular work versus your Dharma work, anything you want to share before we close?
I think we covered a lot of ground. I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and you're so inspiring. I think that, everyone follows Scott because there's not too many people out there just that are, dedicated to holding it down, like on the traditional end of things, and not selling out, so to speak. There's a lot of ways. Scott's really wise in business and all this stuff. And, sometimes you and I talk about it. And, there's certain things that people could do as teachers that are more clickbait oriented, and and build courses around that and all of that stuff. So I just really honor you and your integrity to just keeping it real, keeping it very, very clear on what's happening. And traditional Buddhism is a very tough sell.
It's pretty tough sell, yeah.
It's a tough sell, and yet it's amazing and profound. And so I just enjoy that about you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I will use your kind words as something to live up to more than something I am. And in a sense, I think it's something I appreciate about your work too, is I think generally we take this notion like we want to help people. That's the main thing. And we just share our experience, our way of working with what we do. And I think that's a way to keep it grounded as well, as opposed to like we don't need to be something we're not. We just share from our heart what we do. And if there's people out there that helps, great.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks again, man. I really
Thanks,
appreciate you, and thank you for having me on, and thank you for the listeners out there. Thank you for showing up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cayce. And everyone, please check out sustainablecaring.com, gentlegrieving.com, but you can just check out Sustainable Caring and or CayceHowe.com. Yeah. Thanks so much, Cayce. Lots of love, man.
Thank you, my friend.